Look, thank you very much, Peter. I'm grateful for the opportunity to come tonight. It's an honour to launch the Counter-Terrorism Yearbook 2018, and can I congratulate at the outset ASPI and the fine people here and the important work that you do. There's an opportunity for me today to reflect a bit on the year that's passed and the challenges to come. As the Home Affairs Minister says at the beginning of this report, Australia's security agencies are operating in challenging times and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. The professionalism and commitment and teamwork of our agencies has saved untold lives over recent years, and I can tell you that's true because I see it up close. The scale and tempo and complexity of the CT challenge today is unprecedented, and Australia's national threat level remains at probable. The most likely form of terrorism in Australia remains an attack by an individual or a small group using simple attack methodologies, but we also know that there is a possibility of more complex attacks. The primary, though not the only, terrorist threat in Australia is from a small number of Islamist violent extremists. As the yearbook notes, despite the fall of the so-called caliphate, ISIL will continue to rely on the internet to export its evil brand and seek local allies to support its militancy. Since 12 September 2014, there have been 6 attacks and 14 major CT disruptions in response to potential attack planning in Australia. A year ago, at this same event, I believe those numbers were 4 and 12. So what we are seeing is a steady progression. We are constantly having to deal with these issues. Our agencies are 24/7 focused on them. In addition to those, close cooperation among our intelligence and law enforcement agencies has led to a series of targeted disruptions and other activities to contain threats before they become disruptions and therefore don't contribute to those statistics. And we continue to identify and investigate individuals in Australia who are engaged in or support terrorism. In July last year, authorities disrupted a group attempting an attack on a plane departing Sydney. Had they succeeded, the ramifications would have reverberated around the world. We enhanced our aviation security measures in the light of this plot, and we're considering new measures. We've seen the impact around the world of unsophisticated lone actor attacks, particularly within Europe. But note, when I say unsophisticated, I don't necessarily mean low casualty. Look at that attack in Nice as an example, more than 80 people killed. The chapter on counter-terrorism in Western Europe in the yearbook shows 16 terrorist attacks in 2017 in 8 different countries, excluding the UK. 15 of these 16 attacks used what you would describe as low capability weapons. Within Australia, we saw on 9th of February this year a stabbing attack against an individual in what is considered to be a lone actor ISIL-inspired attack. Just a few weeks ago, we saw a heavy prison sentence of 44 years handed down to an individual for providing the firearm used in the fatal shooting of New South Wales Police civilian Curtis Cheng. So the disrupted aviation attack at Sydney Airport in July 2017 demonstrates that sophisticated attacks are possible, and it underscores the growing complexity of the terrorist threat we face. The plot to attack the aviation sector and also to develop a chemical device for use on Australian soil reinforces the challenges of the current threat environment and the importance of international collaboration in this effort. I look back to December 2016 also, when a plot to conduct a terrorist attack in Federation Square in the lead up to Christmas was disrupted. 2 of the plotters were also charged with arson in relation to another attack. The plot reinforces the threat posed by small groups of people using basic weapons to threaten places of mass gathering is very real. Since 2001, 49 people have been convicted of terrorism-related offences. And since 12 September 2014, I keep coming back to that date because it's when we raised the national terrorism threat level to probable, 85 people have been charged as a result of 37 counter-terrorism related operations around Australia. Around 220 people are being investigated for providing support to individuals and groups in the Syria-Iraq conflict, including through funding and facilitation, or they're seeking to travel. Since 2012, around 220 Australians have travelled to Syria or Iraq to fight with or support groups involved in the conflict. Agencies estimate around 110 are still active. At least 69, possibly as many as 90 Australians have been killed as a result of their involvement in the conflict. Around 40 people have returned to Australia after travelling to Syria and Iraq and joining groups involved in the conflict, but many of whom did this prior to the declaration of the so-called caliphate. As the Minister for Home Affairs said at the National Press Club in February, in his preface to the yearbook also, the government is determined to deal with remaining foreign fighters as far from our shores as possible and to ensure that if they do return, it's with forewarning and into the hands of authorities. The government has strengthened Australia's national security laws and provided law enforcement agencies with increased powers to address the threat from foreign fighters. The declared area offence makes it a crime for a person to intentionally enter or remain in a declared area. And dual nationals who choose to fight with terrorist organisations offshore may lose their citizenship. Foreign fighters who do return to Australia will be considered by law enforcement and security agencies on a case-by-case basis. Security is our first priorities. Returnees who remain of significant security concern may be subject to control orders and ongoing monitoring. Returnees may also be considered for intervention programs. But be in no doubt, our police are waiting to arrest those who are culpable and to see them face justice if that occurs. In December 2016, a post-sentence preventative detention regime was also established to allow for the ongoing detention of high-risk terrorist offenders who continue to pose an unacceptable risk to the community at the end of their sentence. So that also provides a measure in respect of those who have already been convicted of offences. This year's yearbook has an entire chapter devoted to the Philippines and in particular the situation in Marawi. I share its concerns that ISIL will seek new spaces for its activities, such as the southern Philippines, as foreign fighters seek to leave Syria and Iraq. The conflict in Syria and Iraq has provided Southeast Asian foreign fighters with an opportunity to obtain training and combat experience with the potential to exacerbate long-running local conflicts, such as the 2017 Marawi conflict in the southern Philippines. ISIL's defeat in Syria and Iraq has also increased the potential for an expanded network of fleeing foreign fighters in Southeast Asia. In the Philippines, Australia continues to provide military and humanitarian support for the fight against ISIL-aligned extremists. I might just tell you as an aside too, at one of the recent side events at the ASEAN Australia Summit, the Digi event, I met and spent quite a while talking with two young people from Marawi who'd come to this event to build their network and their skills and to empower themselves in the fight against hate speech. And they were heading out the door from that event back to the Philippines, determined to play their part in helping safeguard vulnerable young people in the southern Philippines. So I was very pleased to see that. Move briefly to technology. Terrorists and violent extremists adapt to their environment. Criminals do. The ubiquitous use of messaging encryption and social media platforms to facilitate illicit and terrorist-related activity is becoming more entrenched. This presents serious threats because they use cyberspace to operate transnationally to extend their reach across borders. As well as using the internet to radicalise and recruit new members and spread messages of hate, terrorist groups are using encrypted messaging apps to plan attacks and avoid detection by our law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Technology presents challenges for us in countering terrorism, but it's also an important ally. And that's very important for us as we look forward. So, for example, at the special COAG on CT last October, leaders agreed to establish a national facial biometric matching capability and signed an intergovernmental agreement on identity matching services. This is an example of technology helping to protect Australians by making it easier for security law enforcement and law enforcement agencies to identify people who are suspects or victims of terrorist or other criminal activity and prevent the use of fake or stolen identities. Agencies in all jurisdictions will be able to use the new face matching services to access passport, visa, citizenship and driver licence images while maintaining robust privacy safeguards. You've heard debate around privacy on this. Can I say that the best way to explain what we'll be able to do is to match images in seconds or minutes that currently could take days or weeks. So it's not somehow a new impost on privacy so much as the technology keeping pace with the requirements of our agencies, which I think is particularly important. But as I said, technology presents challenges, whether it's use of encrypted applications, as we've seen in various attacks, or through the way in which propaganda is spread. Our Prime Minister has said that a new generation of criminals and terrorists is using a new generation of technology, attempting to divide us by exploiting platforms designed to bring us together. And so, we'll also, to address this, the government will introduce legislation to strengthen agencies' abilities to adapt to encryption, similar to the provisions in the UK Investigatory Powers Bill. This legislation will ensure that companies provide communication services and devices in our country, can assist agencies and enhance agencies' ability to use alternative capabilities to be able to stop terrorism. Crowded places. Can I say, Peter and colleagues at ASPI, I was very pleased to see the coverage in the yearbook of the crowded places strategy. It came out of the Australia-New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Committee. It is truly a national document, and as some of you have heard me say before, the drafting team will show you that, because it was one member of my team from the Centre for Counter-Terrorism Coordination. It was a New South Wales police officer, a Tasmanian police officer, and the head of the Shopping Centre Council of Australia. And that's the sort of drafting team you need to come up with a national strategy. The Prime Minister commissioned it following that vehicle-borne attack in Nice in France in 2016. And as I said, I'm happy to see you covering it, because the more publicity it gets, frankly, the better. It's designed to help owners and operators make crowded places across Australia more resilient to terrorism. And as Minister Dutton noted, it was the result of extensive consultation, and it does support ongoing engagement as well as providing guidance on some of the key threats that we face in crowded places: active armed offenders, improvised explosive devices, chemical weapons and hostile vehicle attacks. State and territory police play an important role in sharing threat information and general protective security guidance with owners and operators of crowded places. So anyway, I was very pleased, as I say again, to see it, and that you said it was a notable and welcome development, and I certainly share that view. I said to Isaac when I came in, I talked just a little bit about counter-terrorism financing, and I'm conscious my time is nearly up, but terrorism financing funds individual attack operations, and it helps establish and maintain terrorist groups and sustain the networks connecting them. The increased use of non-conventional financing methods, including digital currency, stored value cards, crowdfunding platforms, also make it harder to detect terrorism financing. At the recent ASEAN Australia Counter-Terrorism Conference that supported the ASEAN Australia Summit, we focused on strengthening regional collaboration to improve detection, disruption and prevention of terrorism funding. As one senior ASEAN colleague succinctly put it in the meeting, no money, no terror. He didn't say it with an Australian accent. Mandatory reporting schemes don't capture amounts that fall below relevant country thresholds, but small amounts of money, as you know, are still significant. So we recognise the value of making suspicious transaction reports better targeted and combining them with other intelligence. And the Southeast Asia Counter-Terrorism Financing Working Group was established last year, and Australia and the Philippines will co-lead the group made up of ASEAN members. And I'd say collectively, intelligence generated through this initiative will provide regional authorities and industry partners with greater insights into the movement and tracking of funds. One thing I'd also say about financial intelligence is it's not just a piece of the puzzle. It can be the outcome. In Australia, 10 people have been convicted for terrorism financing offences, with another 3 people currently before the courts for terrorism financing offences. So it'll give you the sense of the importance of the legal framework as well. The transnational nature of terrorism means we must work together to advance our collective national security. The strength of our allied partnerships is well known. Australia also has a long history of engaging closely throughout the world and with our regional partners to confront violent extremism and defeat terrorist organisations and enhance our regional security. I've mentioned the ASEAN Australia Counter-Terrorism Conference that supported the ASEAN Australia CT Summit. The day before the Prime Minister hosted the special summit, I chaired that CT conference. Minister Dutton made the time to come and open the conference. And this provided a really strong platform to strengthen connectivity and cooperation between Australia and ASEAN members on CT issues. And can I say that a large number of very specific activities came out of it. It wasn't simply a matter of getting together and stating what we would like to be able to achieve. We actually came up with a number of specific measures that will help us do so. And of course, the ASEAN leaders signed an historic agreement on cooperation to counter international terrorism, which enhances our commitment together to confront violent extremism and terrorism. We focused on effective legislative frameworks and law enforcement, counter-terrorism financing, as I just mentioned, and also countering violent extremism. I might just make quick mention of issues of architecture. I don't like to spend too long on architecture. Sometimes public servants find that a bit more interesting than the rest of you. But somewhere in the last few months, and can I say that none of us have taken our eye off the ball in doing this, I became part of the new Department of Home Affairs. As Peter said, I still answer to the Prime Minister as well as the Home Affairs Minister, but the heightened threat level is part of the reason that's led to the recent reorganisation of Australia's domestic security arrangements. Now we do have this Department of Home Affairs led by the Minister for Home Affairs, and he's also Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Its responsibilities are broad for national security, immigration and citizenship, Commonwealth law enforcement, counter-terrorism of course, anti-money laundering, counter-espionage and foreign interference, countering violent extremism, cyber security, emergency management, that's something I've spoken here about before, I think, Peter, multicultural affairs, also border protection, transport security, and the resilience of our national infrastructure. So we have a big job ahead of us, and I'm very pleased to be part of the department. And I believe that it will result in a stronger and more coordinated and strategic response to counter-terrorism issues. And I think we're building on strong foundations, as the yearbook makes clear. Peter mentioned states and territories earlier. They're on the front line of Australia's domestic counter-terrorism response, and engagement with them is absolutely essential, and it's a strong focus. We can't have a discussion about architecture in Australia without talking about the states and territories, and indeed I spent 6 hours today chairing a meeting with them, 6 valuable hours. It was a very interesting meeting. I know when I say 6-hour meeting, people might think differently. As an example of this, Australian government law enforcement and security agencies work closely with state and territory police services to conduct coordinated counter-terrorism investigations. This is done through joint counter-terrorism teams. You'll hear them talked about. They are crucially important. And you only need to look at the significance and common purpose of the national outcomes from the counter-terrorism COAG meeting late last year to see another element of that national partnership in action. I note also that the yearbook talks about the independent intelligence review, and that review's recommendations, I believe, will complement the establishment of the Home Affairs portfolio. So the work of counter-terrorism is complex and it's constant. and we must evolve to meet and stay ahead of the inevitable challenges in our threat environment. It's been a busy year, and we're all going to have a challenging year ahead, one relying on the skill and commitment of all our departments and agencies across all levels of government, the private sector, academia, think tanks, of course, and our community. And of course, ASPI plays a significant and important role as an independent voice, particularly within the CT field. Counter-Terrorism Yearbook 2018 is a great contribution to the field of CT, and I commend it to you. Thank you.